José Antonio Navarro was born into a world that outsiders would later call the Old West. But to him and his family, it was simply home. Long before borders hardened and political systems shifted, Navarro's Tejano roots were firmly planted in Texas soil. His upbringing unfolded within a deeply established community shaped by Spanish, Mexican, indigenous, and emerging Anglo influences. This cultural blending was not an abstract idea. It was the rhythm of daily life. Navarro grew up fluent not only in languages, but in customs, values, and expectations drawn from multiple traditions. Unlike many figures associated with the frontier, Navarro did not see Texas as an empty space waiting to be claimed. The land carried stories, obligations, and memories passed down through generations. Family history taught him that belonging came with responsibility. Property, community leadership, and mutual respect were not merely privileges but duties that required constant attention. From an early age, Navarro learned that survival in times of change depended less on force and more on cooperation, negotiation, and an ability to listen across differences. This environment nurtured Navarro's belief in participation as a moral necessity. While political uncertainty loomed over Texas, he recognized that withdrawal would leave decisions in the hands of those unfamiliar with the region's people and traditions. Engagement, though often risky, was the only way to protect both cultural identity and communal stability. Navarro understood that silence could be as dangerous as conflict, especially in a period when laws, loyalties, and power structures were in flux. As a young man, he observed how misunderstandings and prejudice could fracture communities. Suspicion between cultural groups grew as new settlers arrived and political authority shifted. Rather than retreating into resentment or isolation, Navarro leaned into dialogue. He believed that respect could be claimed through visibility and reasoned participation, even when the systems themselves were unfamiliar or imperfect. His early experiences convinced him that patience was not weakness, but a form of strength. Navarro's formative years reveal why he would later become a steady civic presence during Texas's most turbulent transitions. His identity was never singular or rigid. It was layered, adaptive, and deeply rooted. This combination allowed him to move between worlds without abandoning his principles. In a time when many viewed compromise as betrayal, Navarro saw it as survival, an essential tool for preserving dignity and continuity. This first phase of Navarro's life highlights the human complexity often overlooked in Old West narratives. His story begins not with conflict, but with belonging. It is a reminder that the frontier was shaped by people who sought balance rather than dominance, and whose quiet resolve laid the groundwork for leadership grounded in responsibility rather than ambition. As Texas entered a period of sweeping political transformation, José Antonio Navarro stepped fully into public life, guided by the values shaped during his youth. The region was no longer defined solely by long-standing customs and shared understandings. It had become a contested space where authority shifted rapidly and loyalties were questioned. For many Tejano, this era brought fear of displacement, socially, politically, and culturally. Navarro, however, believed that remaining visible and engaged was the only way to safeguard the rights of his community. Withdrawal would mean surrendering influence at a moment when representation mattered most. Navarro chose to work within emerging political systems, even when they were unfamiliar or imperfect. This decision required extraordinary resolve. New structures of governance often prioritized the interests of recent arrivals while overlooking the voices of those with deep roots in the land. Navarro faced skepticism from multiple directions. Anglo settlers sometimes questioned his loyalty, while fellow Tejano worried that participation risked legitimizing systems that might marginalize them further. Navigating this tension demanded both courage and patience. qualities Navarro displayed consistently throughout his career. Rather than relying on force or confrontation, Navarro emphasized dialogue and legal advocacy. He understood that lasting protection for his people would not come from resistance alone but from shaping the rules that governed Texas's future. This approach placed him in difficult positions, requiring compromise without surrender. He had to translate the concerns of his community into terms recognized by new authorities, while also preserving cultural dignity and autonomy. These efforts were often slow and exhausting, marked by incremental progress rather than dramatic victories. The political climate of the time was harsh. Suspicion toward Tejano intensified, fueled by racial prejudice and fears of divided loyalties. Navarro endured personal attacks, legal challenges, and moments of deep frustration. Yet he remained steadfast, refusing to abandon civic responsibility even when cooperation seemed fragile. His resilience reflected a belief that justice, though delayed, could be advanced through persistence. Navarro understood that progress during periods of upheaval rarely comes quickly, but that disengagement guarantees loss. Through his participation, Navarro became a bridge between worlds. He served as a reminder that Texas was not being created from nothing, but reshaped from a living, complex society. His presence challenged simplistic narratives of conquest and expansion, replacing them with a vision of shared stewardship. This phase of Navarro's life illustrates the emotional and ethical weight of leadership during uncertain times. He bore the burden of expectation from his community while confronting systems that did not always recognize his legitimacy. José Antonio Navarro's enduring place in Old West. Memory rests not on dramatic battles or sweeping conquests, but on the steady consistency of his civic commitment. In a historical landscape often dominated by stories of violence and expansion, Navarro stands apart as a figure defined by perseverance, restraint, and principled engagement. Navarro's legacy is inseparable from his belief that identity and participation must coexist. He refused to abandon his Tejano heritage in order to function within new political systems. Nor did he allow tradition to become a barrier to adaptation. Instead, he modeled a form of leadership rooted in cultural pride and mutual respect. This balance allowed him to advocate for his community without isolating it, reinforcing the idea that inclusion strengthens governance rather than weakening it. His example challenged the notion that progress required erasure of the past. In later years, as Texas settled into more defined political structures, Navarro's influence could be felt in the spaces he helped preserve for Tejano voices. Though the pressures of discrimination and exclusion never fully disappeared, his efforts ensured that long-established communities were not entirely pushed aside by change. His career illustrated that even limited representation could serve as a safeguard against complete marginalization. Navarro understood that progress often arrives through incremental gains, sustained by those willing to endure frustration for the sake of future generations. What makes Navarro especially significant in Old West history is the humanity of his struggle. He experienced doubt, opposition, and personal loss, yet remained committed to dialogue over division. His leadership required emotional endurance as much as political skill. At a time when force was often viewed as the primary path to authority, Navarro's reliance on patience and compromise offered an alternative vision of strength. Navarro's story also reframes how the frontier itself is understood. Rather than a blank canvas for expansion, the Old West emerges as a shared space shaped by memory, negotiation, and coexistence. Through his life, the frontier feels less mythic and more human, defined by families, communities, and individuals striving to protect their place in a changing world. Navarro reminds us that history is not only driven by bold actions, but by steady presence and moral resolve. Today, José Antonio Navarro is remembered as a symbol of civic responsibility during uncertainty. His life invites reflection on how societies navigate transformation and who bears the cost of compromise. In honoring Navarro, we acknowledge that the Old West was shaped as much by thoughtful participation as by conflict. His legacy endures as a testament to perseverance, cultural dignity, and the quiet strength required to stand firm when the future is uncertain.